Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now, honor and privilege to welcome one of our friends, and I will say mentors, Adolph Reed Jr. He's the author of, among many books, Class Notes, which everybody should just, I'm going to keep bothering everybody until you order it. He's also a professor emeritus at the University of Pennsylvania, as well as a longtime labor organizer and political activist. Adolph, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, hey, man. Thanks for having me. It's always good.
It's such a pleasure. It's definitely one of the honors of the job. Would you mind for a second standing up and showing us the awesome T-shirt you're wearing?
Surely. How's that?
Yes. There it is, man. That's what we need. It's I love, and it's very appropriate because we're going to talk about, you know, the state of things and what we need to learn and where we need to go and yada, yada, yada. But I think very in keeping with this show and something that you articulate better than anybody is actually you can understand the kind of liberal PMC mindset by understanding the traditional democratic foreign policy from Vietnam to the attempts at coups in Venezuela or Cuba or Nicaragua today. You wrote a piece in 2019, Vietnam to Venezuela, U.S. interventionism and the failure of the left. Can you talk about that?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, it was prompted by yet another one of those dog pile on the rabbit moments where liberals were stumbling all over themselves to be most flamboyant in denouncing Bolivia or the Bolivian government and then defending the coup against the Bolivian government. And of course, it's what they've been doing with Venezuela ever since Chavez was elected. And I was just saying to a friend of mine this afternoon, it's really ironic among the left. I'm not even talking about just the liberals at this point, but among those leftists who, since from 2002 or from 98, right, found one reason or another to be critical of the PSUV government in Venezuela, mainly because it wasn't pure enough, and because Chavez made too many concessions to his old cronies in the army. And now, of the entire pink tide, the only left government that remains standing is in Venezuela. And it's standing in large measure because the military supports the government. So, I mean, there's a lesson to be taken there. Mm-hmm. And that's what prompted me to write the piece. And my friend Steve Striffler, who is actually a Latin Americanist by profession, wrote a companion piece that was also very good on these matters.
So,
but
sorry, go ahead.
For now, I'm trying to remember exactly when this was. Maybe around 2009 or 2010, I think, when Correa in Ecuador was also trying to extend a term or something. I mean, the U.S. went after him bitterly, right, from the Obama administration, and a bunch of us kind of pulled together a letter to protest this and to get straight the story about what was actually happening then in Ecuador. And how it makes sense for American leftists to think about the pink tide, or made sense for American leftists to think about the pink tide. And for God's sake, to forget or to drop this notion that left governments elsewhere in the world should craft their policies and their political statements to palliate the left wing of the Democratic Party here, right? I found it offensive since the Sandinistas, like in the 1980s.
I want to do a little bit of self-critique here because I think but it comes to the second part of my question, which I think just opens the door up basically to everything from the foreign policy thing to the just sort of mind-boggling narcissism of the Warren contingent, which, you know, is worth emphasizing because it was branded as being, you know, at least kind of on the same continuum as us, and you still see a lot of folks indulging that narrative. But I was a Chomsky kid, and I was very, aware of U.S. crimes and wrongdoing overseas and so on. And then there came a certain point where, and I think it's healthy. Anybody who grows up in a with a certain way, you got to kind of expand your reading habits and take on different perspectives. And also, look, I was a poor, financially strapped, hippie kid. So I wanted to read The Economist. I wanted to feel like maybe there was a hope that I could, make money at one point. And so there's always these personal reasons. But so there was a period of time where, even though I was very fascinated and, particularly, drawn to, the pink tide was really the only thing in the world that, if you had any sense of wanting, some alternative to the model. So even though I was trying to make myself moderate, like Obama and everything, I had that phase. I still was fascinated by the pink tide because it represented something different, and the leaders were extraordinary. And there's this, but there was this tendency, and I'll wrap up in a second, which I think wasn't totally unhealthy, to actually say, look, the United States isn't the only variable in the world. Other governments have their own, they have their own patronage networks. They have their own selfishness. They, every government in the world basically commits some form or another of what we consider to be a human rights abuse. And, and in the last year or two, it's not that I reject that position, and I still actually get allergic to folks who can't, not so much in Latin America, but I would say sometimes around Syria, that I've come into very much adopt most of the kind of outside influence view in many respects, but I just don't think you can get around being real about Russia and Assad and what they have done, even in the context of Gulf CIA destabilization. They're still committing war crimes. And if we kind of jettison that as something we consider, then, I don't know where we're going. I think like a paleocon position is the only viable thing. But at any rate, overall, though, I've come full circle to just be like, you know what? Not everything is the United States, but it is mostly the United States, because we still are the world's superpower. And there's the key word, power. And so much of these discourses in the United States, whether it's, sitting around and being really, really, concerned about the situation in Venezuela, or frankly, even maybe I'm stretching, but I see it on a continuum. I can't get in and do a goddamn endorsement of Bernie Sanders because mean tweets. There's this occupation of total power, or at least a part of total power, as a privileged member of the empire, essentially, combined with a complete non-ownership of any of the realities of power. So we can just have, big abstract conversations about what is and isn't right without any grounding in what is and isn't so. Does that make any sense?
That makes absolute sense, man. I mean, it makes absolute sense. And it's like infuriating, right? When Sanders, in whichever debate that was, I think it was two debates ago, right? The one before Charleston, was being red baited about this issue yet again. And his response was that, look, like, we need to be honest, right? Like, the U.S. has perpetrated coups, Guatemala and Iran, and he mentioned someplace else, I forget. But as you know, the list, like, he could still be on the debate stage, reciting the list of coups that the U.S. has perpetrated, right? And just since the end of the 19th century, right? That was a very refreshing moment, right? Because none of the rest of them ever does that, right? And the terror. So first it was the communism thing, right? The liberals. And of course, the liberals also have this dance, right? Which is, we have to show that we aren't soft on whatever the bugbear in a target of imperialist foreign policy is, right? So first it was communism, right? Now it's terrorism, right? Now it's now it's like human rights abuses, right? But as you say, it's exactly as you say. They reach for an abstract, morally satisfying seeming stance, and completely disattend from the actual historical forces that are on the ground any place. And look, I mean, just take a case like Assad, right? The Assad regime is terrible, and his father's version of it was terrible. At the same time, what the U.S. did and others in backing the so-called democratic forces who were aligned with the Islamists and the worst radical or God, I don't want to call it that. The
conservative.
The most identitarian version of conservative Islamists, right? Because that's what they are.
Yep.
Well, it's another point. Perhaps for later, but it was worth noting, right, that a number of the minority groups in Syria tended to support Assad, not because he was great, but because he kept the other bastards from eating him, right? And that's kind of what it comes down to. And I take your point about the neocons. I'm not. I'm suggesting an American imperialist realpolitik as the way we approach these regimes. And in fact, I mean, the way I lean is, well, actually, it's probably none of our business. Right. I mean,
yep.
It except in the sense that, as you also noted, 60-70% of whatever's going on in the world is messed up. Is messed up in part because the U.S. Has been stirring the pot, right? But it's not our business. And see, this is like a mindset, right, that too many leftists take from the liberals too, right? Like, we have to comment on human rights atrocities elsewhere. Well, why actually? And because the only way that leads, right, is to reinforce, this notion that the Americans are the policemen of the world, right? Because, and I mean, and I know I'm ranting now at this point, but but you and probably at least a healthy percentage of the listeners and viewers will recall Darfur, right? Mm-hmm. And that mass-produced fake movement. I'm trying not to curse on the air, but that
you can curse.
The mass. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Fake genocide, fake insurgency, fake everything, right? That played into other foreign policy interests. That sort of got the strain of the Hollywood left liberals' panties wet or whatever, and provided one of those wonderful opportunities for doing well by doing good, which meant that you could support the end of the genocide by or challenging the genocide by buying a damn T-shirt.
Yeah, so it was like a green pin, and it was Mamdani at Columbia. Is that? I mean, there's one. Okay, just so people know, I believe his name. What is his name?
His name is Mahmoud Mamdani.
Okay.
And the book was published in the U.S. as, I think, Saviors and Survivors, but it's a brilliant piece of work. And by the way, I almost mentioned him a few minutes ago around the identitarian Islamism point, because not long after September 11th, he did another great book called Good Muslim, Bad Muslim, which, among other things, traces the roots of Islamic fundamentalist terrorism, again, back to the U.S. and its backing of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. In fact, a colleague of mine who takes his kid to all the Rambo movies told me that I think the penultimate Rambo movie, or I hope it was the penultimate, I hope there's not one I missed.
I think there was one that came out last year.
Oh, wow. Yeah, okay. I thought that might. with the reanimated corpse of Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But whichever one it was, I guess it was one in the 80s that was set in Afghanistan.
Right.
Right. And it ended there. And my friend told me that the next one, which came out in the 90s, came out after September 11th, couldn't pick up the thread from Afghanistan, because the film ended with Rambo hugging the damn Taliban, or the Taliban, I guess, or I mean the jihadists, right?
Right.
So except the next one, like in Burma, was some crazy ass story. So and one thing that's really frustrating too is people never add it up, right? I mean, my friend Steve Strickland, who I mentioned before, has told me for years, like in a sort of basic, I mean, Latin American politics course that he's taught for years. He said the course is basically like a compendium of U.S. Interventions in Latin America from the late 19th century. And his common experience with students, and this was at the University of Arkansas, the University of New Orleans, and I don't know whether he's teaching it still at UMass Boston, but I'm sure it happened there too if he is. It was that students would go along with critical examination of each instance, right? And then their conclusion at the end of the course would be, God, it's so sad that the U.S. was so naive and like uninformed that we always back the bad guys.
Oh,
and I say, well, if you all back bad guys, then you're the fucking bad guy yourself, right?
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.